Hello, and this is what Hegel on the beach is all about. We're back to the beach. Look at this. What a view. Okay, and today we're going to be doing Hegel's description of feeling, religious feeling. Okay, so phenomenology is, as you'll notice by now, and let me restate, a massively theological work. And I want to talk a little bit today about German Romanticism, because German Romanticism is kind of what Hegel was looking at when he was talking about this particular section of phenomenology. Okay. And in particular, he was looking at something called religious feeling. Now, for you and me, we know feelings probably by the song Feelings. Nothing more than feelings, feelings like I'll never have you in my arms, feelings, woo, feelings. Okay, right? I know you want to hear more, and there will be more later, but Hegel says, to be sure, the object for this infinite, pure inward feeling will eventually come to be, but coming on the scene in a way that this object does not make its entrance as a conceptualized, and for that reason it comes on the scene as something alien. So feeling is inward, it's heartache, it's longing for God, and it's a deliberate turning away from the world. It's a desperate attempt to preserve this communion with God, and we aren't thinking while we're feeling, even though we are experiencing this inwardness. But to put it another way, metaphorically, it's like people putting on like miserable records after a relationship breakdown, because the inwardness of feeling miserable makes you actually feel good, because you're holding on to that moment of lostness, and it puts you fleetingly in contact with that object of love, and you hold on to it. And that's really what things like country music does. And it's a secularized version because it's trying to create a self-understanding, isn't it, through art. So YouTube, a guy called Johnny Ray. So his performance style including theatrics like tearing his hair, falling to the floor, and crying desperately on stage. So Johnny Ray's nicknames were Mr. Emotion, the Nabob of Sob, and the Prince of Wales. And if you want to see feeling in action, YouTube Johnny Ray, I mean, a live version. Faith Can Move Mountains, or, because again, it's a religious thing, faith. That's what he's talking about. This part of phenomenology is about faith. Or his song, Cry, which is this, okay, because I know you want to hear me sing again. Okay, you ready? If your sweetheart sends a letter of goodbye, it's no secret you'll feel better when you cry. Okay, enough of that. So if you look at maybe a ballet as well, some of you, if you stay awake, may get this deep emotional state that gives you a glimpse of the beyond, or what we imagine to be the beyond. And what this does is to illuminate the inwardness in us. Now, it's kind of a weak metaphor, I know, but if for this specific religious moment, but I think you will get the analogy, and we're going to come on a little bit about German Romanticism and stuff. So, Hippolyte, do you like my French accent? Hippolyte, who was a French writer, who was a Hegel scholar, said this. He said, Christianity, of which German Romanticism claims to be an interpretation, is the feeling, if not yet the thought of, is the feeling, if not yet the thought of, the infinite value of specific existence. Love, that which will never reappear, the feeling of the divine which this consciousness has, is a shattered feeling precisely because it is only a feeling. Disciple, crusader, and romantic fail to reach the concept of spirit. They kneel before the cross or they undertake crusades, but in both cases they reach only the feeling of their own misfortune, only a consciousness of the disappearance of what for them is essence. So feeling is an inwardness that isn't just a singular historical moment. It stretches out throughout most of the Christian era, from Jesus' disciples, Christ's disciples, through to the Crusades, but it acquires a special importance with the German Romantic era. Okay? So what was German Romanticism? Because it is really interesting, and I want to talk a little bit about it because Hegel was criticizing it. But it was a response. The technical thing about what German Romanticism is this: it was a response to the spiritual crisis of the late 18th century. And when people describe spiritual crises, you go, look, there's people starving and stuff like that. But for many middle-class people, there was a general spiritual crisis, which I'll talk about. I'm not making it up, it really happened. And some of the Romantics wanted to unite. There was the new post-Kantian ethics, Kant we talked about, and his idealism, and they wanted to unite that with Christian Platonism. Platonism, Plato believed in the forms, he believed in, the world up there, like a heaven up in the sky, just beyond the point there, like Plato. So it came onto the scene, Romanticism, of the spiritual crisis, and it tried to find a way of elevating the individual while saying that all reality, including the self, participated in this thing called absolute being. Okay? So this intuition was communicated not in the language of theology or philosophy, which recognized, but it was through aesthetics and art and actually contact with nature, but in a modern form. Okay? So that recognized the innate spiritual dimension of all creation, especially artistic creation. So, I was talking about ballet, I was talking about literature, poetry, wasn't I? And also, didn't talk about poetry, but poetry, and also painting landscapes like this. So that would help us reveal the divine. So instead of a priest telling you, that's what nature does. And not just nature, but let me put it another way. An artistic interpretation of nature, an artistic interpretation of the world. So revealing the divine was no longer the province of the priest. There'll be a new age of the priesthood of all believers. And I'll do a little bit about the priest next time. Okay. So that's one way to put it. But let's look specifically at one work that was written at this time. I said about the spiritual crisis, in the 18th century, and you're going to go, oh yeah, spiritual. No. Well, I'll give you an example. Goethe wrote a book called The Sorrows of Young Werther, or Werther. Werther as in Werther's Originals with a W, but the Germans pronounce it with a V. Okay, so the sweets that you suck on. So The Sorrows of Young Werther was written in 1774, and by the then 24-year-old Goethe. Goethe was like the German Shakespeare, I think. Now, there's a suicide in the book. It's a love triangle book, and on all books, of course. Anyway, Goethe's book is a highly emotional example of this German Romantic period. And it was after it was written as well, apparently, now I don't know how true this is, but there's certainly some truth in it, there was a spate of copycat suicides because young Werther was so summed up the spirit of the age. And young men from German backgrounds were topping themselves apparently throughout all of Germany. And people would find the bodies of dead young men in like places like this, or rivers, or nice places, and with copies of the book next to them. And it was a bloodbath. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but even this Werther fever, it gripped everyone. And Napoleon apparently took a copy of The Sorrows of Young Werther on campaign to Egypt. And Goethe became an overnight sensation. And there were all kinds of products sold as well. For example, there were books about young Werther. There was people who dressed like young Werther. And then I think there's dress in some countries, they ban you dressing like young Werther. There was a men's perfume called Young Werther. I'm not making it up. Look at now. I don't think there were boxer shorts Young Werther, but there was all kinds of commercial crap. But it had a massive effect. This book. So the book was banned in some countries as well because of its profoundly negative effect on young people. Okay, that's enough Goethe and Werther. That's getting rhymes. So that's a nice picture of the background. Back to mainstream German Romanticism. So mind and nature are more than just matter. Nature is connected to holiness and is therefore mysterious and symbolic. So 1788, Friedrich Schiller produced a poem called Die Götter Griechenlands. Okay? So for Schiller, in this poem, the universe, it's alive with heavenly spirits. There are dryads and naiads in every wood, in every river, every grotto. The sun isn't just the sun, it's the Greek god Helios, who's charging his chariot across the skies. So here you would have like the god of that thing over my left shoulder, and you'd have a dryad, and there's nymphs everywhere because the world's alive. You know, Julie Andrews, the hills are alive with the sound of music. So that's German Romanticism. So in Schiller World, the theme park, all aspects of reality are part of the divine. The ideal of it, the ancient Greek society, that had vanished and that had departed, and everyone accepted that, even though people will love the ancient Greeks. Christianity didn't have the hold on society it once had in the post-Kantian age. So also take note that Schiller wasn't just a philosopher, he was primarily a poet as well. And he thought the poet's role was to reimagine the world through aesthetic imagination. It's through poetry and art rather than philosophy. And we could get special insight into nature and divinity. Okay, so Hölderlin, if you remember the guy who went crazy and he was living in the tower, I think it was video 1 or 2 that I did. So he was Hegel's good mate and he went crazy. Well, he said that the poet is like the priest trying to create and reflect the divine. So the infinite gives rise to consciousness, and consciousness is an experience of the infinite manifested in all individuals through a longing, a yearning for the infinite. So this may take the form of feeling for the sublime. And what could be more sublime than this landscape, right? And all human beings feel it naturally, but they don't experience it in thought. They experience it as something ephemeral or something indefinable, right? It's an expression of infinite striving. It's longing. Oh, I wish I could just jump into that ocean now. Well, I'm not going to. Maybe another video. So a musical moment, a moment in nature or something we experience, look at a painting or, you had a lovely poem, that kind of thing, okay? Now, I don't know whether this is true, but I read that the self is therefore dynamic in nature. This is the German Romantic view. An insight Schlegel's supposed to have taken from Fichte. I don't know. That's probably another video, so I'll leave that hanging out there again. So Hölderlin, as we know, who was a poet, his early poetry was influenced by Protestant pietism. And, a pietist is praying all the time and looking for works of manifestations of God's work on earth and so on. And again, that emphasized the inward nature of feeling and subjective experience. And Novalis' work was entirely submerged in this type of Christian inwardness. So that's my brief world tour of German Romanticism in about 2 minutes. So back to Hegel, around paragraph, I think it's 217, Hegel's description of the experience of feeling is focused on the type of religious devotion where inwardness is intensively felt. So yeah, inwardness has been felt, but it's a special type of inwardness. It's heightened. And he has in mind its Protestant moment. Protestant feeling. It's a moment of individuality, and it's, as I said, turning away from the world. Harris says, devotion is the feeling of the inward presence of an other, a presence which is objective in the way that outward or physical objects are. The alien presence is an absolute or universal presence, and that is what was meant by calling the feeling pure. For the unhappy consciousness, remember, we're almost out of that now. In its original shape, this inner feeling was identical with the presence of God in church, signaled by the ringing of the bell and the smell of the incense. We can see this in Catholic ritual, yeah? So feelings there in Catholic ritual. But in Protestantism too, we see this. And Harris says, the Protestant virtuosi of inward feeling regarded this symbolic outward presence with contempt as a piece of superstitious mummery. The superiority of thinking to feeling is clearly asserted here, but it is asserted against the piety of inward and outward sensibility equally. And it is clear enough in faith and knowledge that Hegel regards the objective beauty of religious ceremonial as sounder and healthier than the subjective beauty of religious sentiment. So the Protestant moment is an intensification of the inward feeling. Back to the text, 218. This is Hegel. However, initially, the return of the heart into itself is to be taken in the sense that, to itself, it is the heart which is singularly individual actuality. It is the pure heart for us, or in itself, which has found itself and which is satiated with itself. For even for it, to itself, in its feelings, the essence has in fact cut itself off from it. This feeling is nonetheless in itself self-feeling. It has felt the object of its pure feeling, and this object is itself. It thus emerges as self-feeling, or as the actual existing for itself. In the battle of hearts, the singular individual consciousness is only as a musical abstract moment. Hegel here is talking about the immediate awareness of God that we have in feeling. You know the Johnny Ray thing, the musical moment, praying, singing in church? But people like Jacobi and Schleiermacher and the German Romantics typified this. So on Schleiermacher, he's another German Romantic, so he's not my speciality, so I'll just give the briefest overview, because it seems that Hegel might have had him as well in mind in this section. So Schleiermacher was like a good German Romantic. He thought religion was, again, feeling. He describes devotion as immediate union that vanishes as soon as we become conscious of it, again, so it's not thinking. In this moment, the universal and infinite unites with the particular and the finite. Piety is the feeling of God acting upon us using objects in the world, the real world, and we are his instrument. Piety is a pre-conscious feeling, okay? Pre-conscious, so again, we're not thinking. It isn't thinking as we know it, it's the consciousness of being absolutely dependent, or which is the same thing of being in relation to God. So the source of religious feeling is absolute dependence on God. So for Schleiermacher, the church's role is that of a teacher. It doesn't speak with the absolute authority of God. Religion knows one basic contact with God, and that is within the depths of the individual being. Yeah? The experience or feeling is the essence of religion. The little tingle that you get in your chest. Schleiermacher differentiates himself from Catholic doctrine, in which the priest is the link between you and God. Priest tells you what to think. And he also actually separates himself from Protestantism, much of it as well. He also believed that reason is immanent in nature, yeah, and that the human being was an individualization of universal reason. And I'm going to come on to the role of the priest in the next section, and how the distinction between priest and laity was becoming blurred, and had been blurred, but for Schleiermacher it was so. There was no room for an authoritative body of church teaching. His model was that of the inner life of the soul and its relations to God. So it's very, very unhappy consciousness, broken consciousness. So feeling, to sum up, it's not specifically Protestant, but the intense inwardness of the feeling is part of pietist Protestantism. Max Weber, the Protestant ethic and the rise of capitalism would seem to be a description of the loneliness that is generated by this extreme inwardness. That's what the book's about. So compared to the communal religion of Catholicism, the inwardness of Protestantism, it's an advance or a step forward in the journey of spirit, okay? But it's also a loss. It's not just a step forward. So the loss of the communal and the social, and we still bear the scars of this loss with the rise of individualism. So Catholicism is, or it was, full of festivals and symbolism. So here in beautiful Madeira, yeah, look around. You can still see, not on the coastline, but inland, you can see the vestiges of the Catholic faith with their festivals, with the flowers, with the processions and the parades. It was all communal. It wasn't like it's in the heart, it's in the heart. It was outward. And on the island, there's some fabulous and unexpected reminders of what we've lost. So these Catholic ceremonies may be on the wane, but they're still there. And if you come, maybe at Easter, you'll see them. So some people locate the end of Hegel's journey here in the unhappy consciousness. Okay? Remember that the unhappy consciousness is still a broken self. It locates its real self, not on earth, but in heaven. And at some point also in the future, literally the hereafter. So there's a separation of the empirical earthly self, us on earth, with the transcendent and real self. And that's why it's plausible that even though there's over half the book to go, this looks like an ending to the book in one sense. Actually, if you look at most forms of Marxism, from the really benign stuff to ultra-Stalinist, Marx's famous phrase about, fishing in the morning, hunting in the afternoon, rearing cattle in the evening or whatever, that's a realization of humanity's destiny. It's almost like an afterlife, isn't it? It feels like it's like someone describing what heaven's like. And it's also an example of a separation in time, because our real essence is located in this idyllic picture, a pastoral picture, by the way, as well, of beautiful countryside and stuff like that. Okay, I'm doing Marxist like disservice there, but in the German ideology and stuff like it is quite early. Marx is very, don't say he's romantic, but he has a romanticized view of the future, which I think he changes, and maybe I'll come to that later. Anyway, hopefully in this video and the last, so I've tried to sketch out how religion moved from the church into the world and into nature, how nature and the world became the focus for humanity's search for truth. And again, we're in beautiful Madeira. The backdrop here should remind you of, there's a famous German romantic painting which I bought with me all the way from England. Okay, not the real picture, but I'll show it to you. And I'm going to show it. Let me show it to you. It shows you how the sublime, nature, humankind are related to each other, and how we become one with nature. So next time we'll move away from feeling, and we're going to talk about reason. But here's the picture, the German Romantic, famous. I don't know who painted. I've forgotten now, but there's the picture. Can you see it? Yeah. There's some like classy middle class German guy there, and he's sort of staring out into the mountains. Yeah, like misty eyed, like me. I'm going to do it now. Okay. So I'll leave you with this video, German Romanticism. I'm going to move this back a bit. Yeah. And then I'm going to do my pose to the sea. You ready? German Romanticism. See you next time.